About a year ago, I took a look at CachyOS for the first time, and I was really impressed. At the time, it was a rather new distribution. I'd never really heard of it, and, it was recommended by you guys, the viewers of the channel, and I was extremely impressed with this Arch-based Linux distribution that was really quite gorgeous. I took a look at their KDE Plasma version. They have a couple of different desktop versions, but I haven't taken a look at it since that initial first look I took about a year ago. So today what I wanted to do is I wanted to revisit CachyOS because they had a release about 2 weeks ago. I saw the release announcement over on Distro Watch, so I went ahead and downloaded their latest version of the KDE Plasma Edition. I wanted to run through a quick installation and first look on camera. I'm going to run through the installation on camera because really the installer is one of the big reasons to use CachyOS. As far as, they spend a lot of time on their customized version of the Calamares installer. Being an Arch-based distribution, Arch is pretty much Arch everywhere. So really, the installer is, one of the primary things we really want to focus on this video. So I grabbed the ISO, I created a virtual machine here, and on boot up, obviously we get our live KDE desktop environment. We also are welcomed with the CachyOS Hello program. This is their custom welcome application, and part of the welcome application on the live ISO is this button here to launch the installer. So let's go ahead and launch the installer, which of course is going to be the Calamares installer. And the installer took about 20 or 30 seconds to load there. Now, one interesting thing with their installer is, when the Calamares installer pops up, you also get a terminal window. They're using Alacrity for the terminal. So you get a terminal window as well. So if you want to see what the installer is actually doing and you want the terminal output, maybe you want to read potentially error messages or whatever, you can actually view the terminal output as well. That's probably here mainly for devs of CachyOS. It's probably why they initially added that feature. So if you're just a regular desktop Linux user, do you necessarily need to read the terminal output? No, not really, but it is neat that it's there for those that want to check that out. So let me go ahead and run through a quick installation. Here on the welcome screen, we need to choose our language for the installer. American English is the default. I'm just going to click next. It has correctly chosen the central time zone and the US for me, probably through some geolocation. It knows kind of where I'm at. I'm not in Chicago, but I am in the central time zone in the US. So I'll just click next once again. Keyboard English US has been chosen for me. That's correct. So once again, I just click next. And then we need to do something with the disk. I can either erase the disk and give the entire virtual hard drive of this virtual machine over to CachyOS, which is what I'm going to do. But if I needed to, I could manually partition the drive myself. This would be necessary, for example, if I was dual booting alongside another operating system. For me, I'm going to do the automatic partitioning, so I'm going to choose erase disk. Their default file system is ButterFS. I usually just go with the defaults when I do these, so I'll leave ButterFS as the default, but you have the option of XFS, Extend4, F2FS, and ZFS. So that is interesting that you have all of those choices. That is actually rather nice. And I can tell you, as someone that does a lot of these distro first looks, you don't see a lot of Arch-based distributions that offer ZFS as an option in their Calamares installer. So that is a really welcome addition. But I'm going to choose ButterFS as the file system, and then I'm going to go ahead and click next. And then we have our desktop and window manager selection. Now for me, I'm going to choose the Plasma desktop because I believe, again, that's their flagship. You can see they've got a really nice kind of theme with their KDE Plasma desktop environment, so I'll choose that. But they have various other selections. You can choose pretty much all of the major desktop environments and several different tiling window managers as well, including one of my favorites, Qtile is here. That's interesting, but I'm going to go with Plasma today, so I'm going to click next. And then we get some more package things that we could install. You can see by default they're going to install CachyOS packages. So this is packages that CachyOS builds themselves that are specific to this distribution, packages they maintain themselves in their own custom repositories. Things like, for example, CachyOS wallpapers, that's going to be their wallpaper pack, right? We kind of know what a lot of this is. CachyOS Hello, that's that welcome application, right? So this is pretty neat. A lot of config files, of course, will be packaged in the, the CachyOS packages. Then you have base devel and common packages. So this is your base Arch Linux packages. Like if you were doing a base Arch install, that's pretty much those packages. And then KDE Desktop, because I chose KDE Plasma for my desktop environment. This is all the packages that are part of that big, meta group of packages that's going to get installed here. So I could review this if I wanted. I could turn off some of this stuff if I wanted. I'm going to leave it all ticked on. But if I wanted to, I could go in here and install some other window manager and other tools, accessibility tools, printer tools, scanner tools, whatever I needed. So really neat. Now, some of the customization options they've done with the Calamares installer, I really quite like. But I'm just going to click next. Let me go ahead and create my username and my password. My username will be DT. I'm going to call the host name of this computer, I'll call it CachyOS-VM because it's a virtual machine. So if I ever SSH into this machine, I know it's running CachyOS and it's a VM. It's not an actual physical machine. And then I'm going to create a strong and complicated password for my DT user. And then I'm going to repeat the strong and complicated password. And then do I want to log in automatically without asking for a password? No, that's ticked off by default. Leave that ticked off. You should have to enter a password to enter any computer just for privacy reasons. And then finally, use the same password for the administrator account. So that's ticked on by default. I'm going to leave that ticked on. This means my DT user's password is the sudo password as well. I don't have to remember two different passwords. So normally I would just click next and move on, but you can see CachyOS is warning me that my password is too short. Well, I guess I have to do a more complicated password. So let's make a more complicated password. And now that one seems to work. So I'll click next. We get a summary. Location looks good. Keyboard looks good. Partition scheme looks good. I'm going to click install and install now. And away we go. We'll get a little slideshow here. This portion of the installation typically takes about 5 to 10 minutes on my computer. If I really want to, again, I can watch the output here in the Alacrity terminal as the installer does what it does. But for me, I'm going to step away, grab a cup of coffee. I'll be back once the installer has finished. And the installation completed, and I rebooted the machine. I got a grub menu, so it looks like the installation worked as expected. And I've logged into our desktop environment, the KDE Plasma desktop environment. Now remember, this is Arch Linux-based distribution, and the ISO is only about 2 weeks old, but being Arch-based, there's probably, a couple hundred updates I could take right away. If I was installing this on physical hardware, I would definitely go ahead and take the updates, but for purposes of this video and this virtual machine, I'm not going to take an update of the system just yet. But if you wanted to, you could probably do that from their welcome application, because in the welcome application, you got a lot of really good information here. You got documentation, you got README, the release info for this particular version, Wi-Fi information, you got links to their support forums, you got a link to software as well. I'm assuming that probably would open a graphical software center. Let's see. Or that may just be documentation about software. Yeah, it looks like that's taking you to the GitHub for CachyOS, all the package builds. So this is all of the packages that CachyOS maintains and builds themselves. You can go read the Arch package builds for each of those. You've got information about getting involved in the project, development, and donation. So you got a little bit of support information. You've also got some information for those that want to get into actively contributing to the CachyOS development. You've got apps and tweaks and install apps. Let's see what apps and tweaks are. So that gives us another page here. So this is interesting. You got a lot of common fixes for things on Arch-based systems. You notice my cursor is kind of wigging out. Sometimes my cursor all of a sudden becomes 10 times its normal size here. Now, one thing, this is KDE Plasma using Wayland by default, and obviously we're in a virtual machine, so there could be some virtual machine specific graphical issues here, but I've never noticed that before, that weird bug where all of a sudden the cursor just becomes gigantic, but then it goes back to normal. But we do have this button here, System Update. I'm assuming if I clicked it, it would open a terminal and run a sudo pacman syu. Let's see. Yeah, it's asking for my root password, and if I give it, it's going to run a pacman syu, which I said I wasn't going to do, so I'll decline that update for now because it'll take a little bit of time because, it's going to have a lot of things that need to be updated, including the Linux kernel. There's been new Linux kernels out since the release of this ISO that was released, and the Linux kernel is going to take a little bit of time to install, so I'll decline that update. We have reinstall all packages. Now that's interesting. I don't know if I've ever seen that, but maybe there is a use case for having that here. We also have refresh key rings things, remove orphans, which is kind of a dangerous kind of thing to do if you don't really know what you're doing on an Arch-based system. This command here could sometimes have unintended consequences. Sometimes when you try to remove orphan packages on an Arch-based distribution, sometimes it does weird things like remove the Linux kernel, for example. But you got a lot of stuff here, mirror stuff, install snapper support, yada yada yada. So really cool stuff here. Let me go back to the main screen here and let me go to install apps and let's see what happens here. Okay, and now we get another screen here where we can go through and add extra packages. For example, browsers. What do they install out of the box as a browser? Let me go and search for browser. The Cachy browser. I'm not sure what the Cachy browser is. Probably a Firefox based browser. Let's see. Let's go to help, about Cachy, Cachy browser for CachyOS. You can see this is version 131.0.3, and by the numbering, I'm assuming they're going along with the same release cadence of Firefox is again what I'm assuming there. But if I wanted to, I could go get Chromium, I could get Brave, I could get just Mozilla Firefox itself. You got some other options here, including proprietary software like Opera is here as well. So this is nice. You got Office suites, you got your various popular Office suites available if you want to go grab any extra tools like a video or audio players, whatever it is you need. So this is nice that they have all of this right here up front in the welcome application. For me, I'm going to close the welcome application. I'm going to go ahead and slide this slider off. That way this welcome application doesn't automatically launch every time I log into KDE. It's fine to have it automatically launch the first time I log into CachyOS, but now that I've went through this, I don't need to see this application again. So I'll close it. If I ever want to see that application again, remember the title was Cachy Hello, so I could just go into the menu system and type hello, and there is CachyOS Hello again, if I ever need to see that program again. Now, I'm not going to go through the usual thing where I go through the menu and see what applications are installed by default because, it's an Arch-based distribution. Anything you want, you can go grab. I mean, you can install software you want. You can remove all of this software that was pre-installed. You can just go get whatever you need. For me, I'm going to focus mainly on Cachy-specific stuff. So we've already seen their browser, the Hello application. We also have the CachyOS package installer. Let's click that. All right, and this is another kind of installation program where we can go in here and tick on things to actually install. For example, you got a lot of audio tools here. Some of them, really nice things like Ardour, Audacity, Bitwig, Lollipop, MuseScore, Rose Garden. Some really interesting things there. Some of these tools I've played around with in the past. Really cool stuff. You got more browser selections. You got more browsers in this selection than you had in the other tool because you've also got things like Falcon. If you wanted to run Falcon, Cute Browser, LibreWolf, I love that. Vivaldi is also here for those of you that love Vivaldi. Communications, all your chat clients like Discord and Slack and Signal and Telegram and Teams, Zoom, all of that stuff is here. So that is pretty cool. You also have repo information. Let's see. So this kind of reminds me of a screen from like the Synaptic Package Manager or from Octopi, where it lists all of the packages that are in the repos where I could go in here, tick things on and then, tick on whatever I want to install. Maybe I want to install 0AD. By default, I think it's going to pull in 0AD data, but if I could tick it on as well and then click install and install the 0AD game. I'm not going to do this on camera. This 0AD game actually is a pretty big download. It would take a long time in this VM. So I'm going to close that. Back in the menu system, once again, I'll type Cachy. They also have the CachyOS kernel manager. And this is pretty interesting because now you can pick and choose exactly what kernel you want. And of course, some of these are just standard kernels that are in the Arch repos. You can see they're in the extra or the core repo, the Arch repos, but you also have kernels that are in the CachyOS repo. So I guess they maintain some of their own custom kernels as well. You can see this one right here, CachyOS v3 Linux-CachyOS. That is a stable Linux kernel. And I'm assuming that is what we're running here. I could check that out out in a terminal. I wonder if they have a hotkey for the terminal. In a lot of distributions, if you do Control-Alt-T, it brings up a terminal. And that's the case here in CachyOS as well. Now let me zoom in. So typically Control plus will zoom in a terminal, and that's what happens here in console. Let me do a uname-r, and that is the kernel that we do have, the CachyOS kernel, their build 611.7-2. This is an older kernel. Again, this ISO came out a couple of weeks ago. We're on a newer kernel now on Arch. While I've got the terminal open, let me do an echo. I'm going to echo $xdg underscore session underscore type, just to verify that we are using KDE Plasma under Wayland. If this was KDE Plasma on X11, X11 would have been the output from that command. Let's see if htop is installed. Htop is not installed. Well, I can quickly install htop. I'm going to do a sudo pacman-S htop. And let's go ahead and give our super secure password. Let's install htop and let's run it. Let's see what kind of system resources we're using. You know, system resources look a little high here. Now, some of this is going to be based on file systems. A lot of times when I do these installations, most Linux distributions default to extend4 as a file system. Remember, CachyOS is using Btrfs as a file system, and depending on the file systems, if you use Btrfs or especially ZFS, sometimes because they can use more RAM and do something with that RAM, sometimes they'll use more RAM than, for example, what the extend4 file system will use. So we're using about 1.3 gigs of the 6 gigs of RAM I gave this VM. Let me queue to kill htop. Now, obviously, we have all the Arch packages here. I'm wondering, do they include a Flatpak out of the box? So if I do a Flatpak list, obviously Flatpak, you could see Flatpak when you start typing it, it's red. That means that's not a real command, meaning Flatpak is not installed. I'm assuming this is probably the fish shell. If I scroll back up to neofetch, let's see, shell, fish 3.7.1. I love the fish shell. Really, the fish shell should be the default interactive shell pretty much on every Linux distribution these days. I know that's a controversial thing to say, but fish is so good. Everyone, really, if you haven't tried out fish, you should give it a try just for things like this. You know, this is just so nice. You know, I didn't really have to enter that command to find out if Flatpak was installed. I already knew because the fish shell was letting me know. And I'm assuming snap is also not installed. Yeah. So, you know, if you want your containerized distro agnostic packages from Flatpak or Snap, of course, you can install all that yourself. I'm kind of glad it's not installed out of the box because, you know, some people don't want that stuff installed. And honestly, it's easy enough. If you want Flatpak, all you need to do is do a sudo pacman-S Flatpak, right? If you want snaps, all you need to do pacman-S snapd. If you want both, just do this command here, Flatpak and snapd. Do the command, reboot the system, and now you have Flatpaks and snaps enabled for you. So the people that complain about Flatpaks and snaps, you know, there's really no need to complain. If you don't want it, just uninstall it. If you want it, just install it. As far as the desktop, you know, love the wallpapers. I love, you know, some of what they've done with the panel here. Of course, they're doing a floating panel with rounded borders, you know, very modern kind of look. Let's take a look at their wallpaper pack because they did install a specific CachyOS wallpaper pack. So if I right click and go to desktop and wallpaper, and obviously we got some abstract art here, which honestly, I love abstract art wallpapers. They're some of my favorite wallpapers. Got some really cool stuff. Now, these wallpapers are rather dark, and because they're rather dark, I'd probably rather have a light theme with these particular wallpapers. Since we're using a dark theme, I'd kind of like a lighter wallpaper. I'm just going to go through here and see if I can find a lighter wallpaper like this here, you know, a little bit more contrast. Or this one here called Liquid. Here's one called Skyscraper. This is interesting as well. Yeah, it's mostly just abstract art. And then we have Nexus here, which Nexus actually looks like one of the default Plasma wallpapers, probably not CachyOS specific here. Spectrum here. Woo, yeah, that one could kind of melt your eyeballs, right? It's a little busy for me. And then here is a CachyOS branded wallpaper. Yeah, for me, I think if I was going to choose one of these, I think I'd go with that. Let me hit apply and OK. So there you have it, a quick and cursory look at the recent release of CachyOS. And this is, again, an Arch-based distribution. And I know A lot of people, including myself, will say, hey, if you've seen one Arch-based distribution, you've seen them all. But CachyOS does differentiate itself a little bit, really, with that installer. Their own Calamares installer, that particular installer was very well put together. It looked great. It had a ton of options. I love the fact that it offered all those file system options. You don't see very many distros that do that. It also offered a ton of desktop environment and window manager options right there in the installer. One of the best Calamares installers I've seen. When I say best Calamares installers, Calamares, every distro does their own thing with it. I think CachyOS really takes it to a higher level than most other Arch-based distros that use the Calamares installer. The other thing is, their choice of packaging. I love the fact that they do the fish shell. I love their configurations, KDE Plasma, their theming. Everything just looks good. It looks professional and polished. So job well done, developers of CachyOS. Now, before I go, I want to thank a few special people. I want to thank the producers of this episode: Matt, James, Steve, Armor Dragon, Darloff, Daedalus, GDR, George, Lee, Matthew, Methos, Arion, Paul, Peace, Arch, and Fedora, Realities for Less, Red Prophet, Roland, Solastri, Tenrin, Wargento, and Ubuntu, and Willie. These guys, they're my highest tiered patrons over on Patreon. Without these guys, this episode about CachyOS would not have been possible. The show is also brought to you by each and every one of these fine ladies and gentlemen. All these names you're seeing on the screen, these are all my supporters over on Patreon, because I don't have any corporate sponsors. I'm sponsored by you guys, the community. So if you like my work and want to see more videos about Linux and free and open source software, subscribe to DistroTube over on Patreon. Peace, guys.